At his son's grave, a powerful billionaire confronts a mystery, his maid's daughter crying. What she knew would unravel a truth he never saw coming. He came to the grave expecting silence, haunted only by his own regret. Arthur Montgomery, a man who built an empire, was lost in a fog of grief for a son he barely knew. But this Sunday, his ritual of penance was broken. Someone else was there. A small girl crying, her hand resting on the cold granite, tracing the engraved name. She was a mystery in a faded blue dress, a child who couldn't possibly know the war hero buried there. This was the moment a billionaire's hollow world cracked open, revealing a secret his son had taken to the grave. Until now. And where in the world are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. With that, let's get right into the story. He owned the city, but he couldn't buy back the time he lost. Arthur Montgomery followed the same path every Sunday, lost in a fog of grief. He expected silence at his son's grave, but today he found a mystery. The silence in the Rolls-Royce was heavy. Arthur Montgomery stared out the armored glass window. He did not see the bustling Chicago streets. He saw nothing. The city's skyline he had built, the towers bearing his name, meant nothing. They were just glass and steel, empty monuments to a life he no longer understood. For 5 years, Sunday had been a day of penance. His driver, Robert, a man who had been with him for 20 years, knew the ritual. He navigated the car through the city's wealthiest suburbs toward the quiet, manicured lawns of Westwood Memorial Gardens. Robert never spoke on Sundays. Arthur appreciated the silence. It matched the void inside him. The car slowed, crunching softly on the gravel path. "I will wait, sir," Robert said, his voice low. Arthur merely nodded. He stepped out of the car, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive dark wool suit. He was a tall man, imposing even in his late 60s. His hair was thick and silver, perfectly combed, but his eyes, sharp and blue, were hollow. They held the permanent shadow of loss. He carried a small, simple bouquet of wildflowers. His son David had hated the extravagant displays Arthur preferred. David had hated the galas, the boardrooms, and the suffocating pressure of the Montgomery name. David, his only son, had defied him. He had joined the army. He had become a hero to strangers, a captain spoken of with reverence, a legendary veteran. And he had died in the desert 5 years ago. Arthur walked the familiar path. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and cut grass. This cemetery was exclusive, a final resting place for the city's elite. But death made no distinctions. It had taken his son just the same. He had built David a monument, a massive granite headstone etched with his name, Captain David Montgomery. Below it, a bronze plaque detailed his valor, his service, his sacrifice. Arthur hated the plaque. He had approved it, paid for it, but he hated it. It felt like an advertisement for a son he barely knew. His guilt was a physical weight. He had been so focused on building an empire, so angry that David had rejected it. He hadn't made time. He had thought time was endless. He thought he could fix the rift later. He was wrong. He rounded the final row of towering oaks. The gravesite came into view, set on a small hill overlooking a quiet pond, but Arthur stopped. He froze. His grip tightened on the flowers. Someone was there. It was a child. A small girl sitting cross-legged on the grass directly in front of David's headstone. Arthur's first reaction was irritation. This was a private cemetery. Strangers rarely wandered here, and children never did. This was his place, his grief. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old. She had thin, pale blonde hair that fell in straight, slightly tangled locks over her shoulders. She wore a simple blue dress. It was clean, but Arthur could see from this distance that the cuffs were frayed and the color was faded. Her shoes were worn, the soles thin. She was crying. It was not a loud, theatrical sob. It was a silent, heartbreaking tremor. Her small shoulders shook. Her head was bowed. One small hand was resting on the cold granite base of the headstone, tracing the engraved letters of David's name. Arthur stood there for a full minute watching. The sight was wrong. It didn't belong. He thought of his staff. He hadn't had many children in his life. His mansion was a quiet, sterile place. He used to have a maid, a quiet woman named Susan. She had been efficient. He barely noticed her. She had a daughter, he recalled vaguely. But that was impossible. Susan had quit. The memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. She had resigned suddenly, about 6 months after David's funeral. Arthur had been annoyed at the time. She was a good maid. He'd offered her more money. She had refused, polite but firm. She said she needed to move, to be closer to family. He hadn't thought of her since. This girl could not be. He dismissed the thought. It was absurd. He cleared his throat. The sound was loud in the quiet air. "What are you doing here?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. It was the voice he used in the boardroom, the voice that demanded answers. The girl leaped to her feet as if struck by electricity. She spun around. Her eyes were wide, a startling bright blue, red-rimmed from crying. Her face was smudged with dirt as if she had wiped her tears with a dirty hand. She looked terrified. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The tall, imposing billionaire in his tailored suit and the small, fragile girl in her faded dress. He saw the fear in her eyes. But beneath it, he saw something else. A flicker of something stubborn. A spark of defiance that reminded him, painfully, of David. "You shouldn't be here, child," Arthur said, taking a step forward. He tried to soften his tone, but he was clumsy with gentleness. "This is a private area." The girl didn't say a word. She looked at him, then at the flowers in his hand, then back at the grave. Her small chest heaved as she caught her breath. Then she bolted. She scrambled away, moving with a surprising quickness. "Wait!" Arthur called out. But she was already disappearing into the dense woods that bordered the cemetery. She didn't look back. Arthur stood there, stunned. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. He looked at the grave. The flowers he held suddenly felt heavy, pointless. He dropped the bouquet onto the grass. His heart, a muscle he thought had atrophied, was pounding. Who was that girl? Why was she crying at David's grave? He walked to the headstone. He looked down at the place where she had been sitting. The grass was slightly pressed down, and there, lying on the stone base, was a small white object. Arthur bent down. His knees creaked in protest. He picked it up. It was a small, carved bird. It was made of wood, painted white, but the paint was chipped. It looked old. It looked loved. She had dropped it. He closed his hand around the small wooden bird. It was still warm from her touch. The image of her face, those terrified, defiant blue eyes, burned into his mind. He couldn't place it, and yet there was something familiar, something that tugged at a memory he couldn't quite reach. He needed answers. That night, Arthur Montgomery could not sleep. His mansion, usually a comforting fortress of silence, felt like a tomb. He sat in his massive leather chair in a study lined with books he never read. The small wooden bird sat on the polished mahogany of his desk. He kept seeing her face. He kept hearing his own harsh voice. He had spent 5 years sealing himself off from the world. He had buried his pain in work, in routine, in the empty pursuit of more wealth. He had built walls around his heart so thick he didn't think anything could ever get through. Now those walls were beginning to crack. A 10-year-old girl with blonde hair and worn-out shoes had done what no one else could. She had made him feel something. He felt curiosity. He felt confusion. And buried deep beneath the irritation, he felt a strange, unwelcome pull of concern. Why had she been there? What connection could a poor, unknown child possibly have to his son, the war hero? He thought again of his former maid, Susan. He hadn't hired her personally. His household manager handled that. But he remembered her. She was plain, quiet, and ruthlessly efficient. She kept her head down. She was invisible, just as he liked his staff to be. He remembered her daughter. He'd only seen the child once or twice, a fleeting glimpse in the staff corridors. A small, quiet girl with... Arthur sat up straight, blonde hair. He picked up the phone on his desk. He pressed a single button. It was 2 a.m, but he knew the man on the other end would be awake. "Marcus," Arthur said, his voice firm. "Mr. Montgomery," replied the voice on the other end. It was level, professional. Marcus Thorne was Arthur's private investigator, a man who had handled sensitive corporate matters for him for years. Marcus was expensive, discreet, and incredibly effective. "I need you to find someone," Arthur said. "A business matter, sir?" "No," Arthur said, looking at the small wooden bird. "Personal." He described the girl, 10 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, faded blue dress. He described the encounter at Westwood Memorial. "She was at my son's grave," Arthur said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. There was a pause on the other end. Marcus knew, as everyone knew, not to mention David Montgomery. "I see, sir." "A child. Do you have a name?" "No," Arthur said. "But I have a lead. A former employee. A maid named Susan. I don't recall her last name. She worked here. She quit 5 years ago, about 6 months after my son's. After the funeral. Susan. A maid. Quit 5 years ago, and the girl is approximately 10. Do you believe they are connected?" Marcus asked. "Find the maid, you find the girl," Arthur said. "I want to know who she is. I want to know where she came from. And I want to know why she was at that grave. It will be difficult without a last name, sir. Susan is common. You have my entire household's employment records." "Check them," Arthur commanded. "I want an answer by morning." He hung up the phone. He leaned back in his chair. He felt a surge of energy, a focus he hadn't felt in years. This was a problem to be solved, a mystery to be unwound. He looked at the wooden bird. Why was she crying? What did his son David mean to this child? He tried to picture Susan, the maid. He remembered her being young, in her late 20s perhaps. Quiet. Always looking down. He had barely given her a second thought when she resigned. He'd been annoyed by the inconvenience. He'd had to replace her. Now, her departure seemed significant. She had left 6 months after David died. The girl was 10. David had died 5 years ago. Arthur did the math. The dates didn't line up. If the girl was 10, she would have been 5 when David died. He felt a small knot of tension ease in his chest. It was just a coincidence. A stray child. A former employee. The two things were not connected. He was just a lonely old man haunted by ghosts. But as he tried to settle his mind, he saw the girl's eyes again. Blue. Startlingly blue. Just like David's. The phone in Arthur's study rang at 7 a.m. Arthur, who had not slept, snatched the receiver. "Well?" "Mr. Montgomery." Marcus Thorne's voice was all business. "I have the information." "Her name is Susan Miller," Marcus continued, skipping the pleasantries. "She was employed by you for 3 years. She resigned 5 years and 2 months ago and has been off the grid ever since." "Where is she?" Arthur demanded. "This is the difficult part, sir." "She's in a tenement building on the south side, a very rough area. The building is listed as condemned." Arthur's grip tightened. He pictured the girl in the faded dress. "The girl is with her," Marcus said. "Her name is Emily Miller. 10 years old, no school records, no medical records. It seems Susan has been intentionally avoiding the system." "Sir, I must advise caution," Marcus said. "A man like you appearing in that neighborhood? It's dangerous. Susan is clearly protective and wants to remain a ghost. I can send a representative." "No," Arthur said. "I will handle this myself. Send the address to my car." "Mr. Montgomery, I really must—" "You have done your job, Marcus. Send the address." Arthur hung up. He stood, feeling the ache in his knees. He had an answer, but the answer only brought more questions. He slipped the small wooden bird into his suit pocket. The Rolls-Royce glided from gleaming skyscrapers to choked, narrow streets. Arthur watched the world outside his window decay. The buildings were brick, stained with soot, their windows boarded up. This was a part of his city he had not seen in 30 years. It was a part of the city David had talked about. "They're just people, Dad," David had argued years ago after Arthur criticized him for volunteering at a shelter. "They need help. We have more than we could ever need. I build towers." "I create jobs," Arthur had countered. "That is, doing something. Handing out soup is a waste of your potential." The memory was sharp. Arthur pushed it down. "Stop at the corner, Robert," Arthur said. The car hissed to a stop. Robert turned. "Sir, this is not a safe place. Please let me take you to the door." "I will not be chauffeured to a slum, Robert," Arthur said. "Wait here." He was already out of the car. The noise of the street hit him. A distant siren, shouting, the smell of exhaust. He stood for a moment, a man in a $5,000 suit on a street covered in filth. He ignored the stairs. He found the building. It was a skeleton of brick. The front door was gone. He stepped inside. The lobby was dark and cold. The air was thick with the smell of damp and mold. He checked the number, apartment 3B. He climbed the crumbling stairs. On the second floor, a baby was crying. From another apartment, a man and woman were shouting. He reached the third floor. The hallway was narrow, lit by a single, flickering bulb. He found the door marked 3B. The paint was peeling. He could hear a small voice inside, reading aloud, stumbling over a word. He raised his hand to knock. His hand, which had signed deals worth billions, was trembling. Before his knuckles could touch the wood, the door creaked open a few inches. A woman's eye peered out. He recognized her. Susan Miller. But she was not the woman he remembered. This woman was thin, her skin pale. She looked exhausted, worn down to the bone. Her eyes, once cautious, were now wide with pure shock. "Mr. Montgomery?" she whispered. "Susan," Arthur said, his voice steady. Her shock vanished, replaced by panic. She tried to slam the door. "You can't be here!" Arthur put his hand flat on the door. He was much stronger than she was. "I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to talk about," she said, pushing. "Leave us alone." "Go away." "Mom!" The small voice from inside cut through the struggle. Susan froze. Her face turned white. The door was pushed open from the inside. The girl from the cemetery stood there. Emily. She was holding a worn, tattered book. She looked up and saw Arthur. Her bright blue eyes went wide. She dropped the book. It hit the floor with a soft thud. She immediately hid behind her mother's legs. "I saw you," Arthur said, his voice gravel, directed at Emily. "Yesterday, at the cemetery." Susan pulled the girl behind her, shielding her. Her fear was dissolving, turning into a fierce, protective anger. She looked at Arthur with a hatred that stunned him. "Look what you did," she spat. "You scared her." "Get out. Get out." "Why were you at my son's grave?" Arthur demanded. "That is none of your business," Susan said, her voice trembling. "He was my son," Arthur said. Susan let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a shocking, ugly sound. "Your son? You barely knew him. You didn't know him at all." The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. He staggered. The insult was so profound, so true, it stole his breath. "How dare you?" he finally managed. "I dare," Susan said, her fear gone. "I worked in your house for 3 years. I was invisible to you. But I saw. I listened. He tried to talk to you. All you cared about was your name, your money." "You were a maid," Arthur said, a desperate attempt to regain control. "He was my family too," Susan shouted. The words echoed in the hallway. Arthur froze. He stared at Susan. The implications crashed down on him. My family, too. What did you say? He asked. Susan's face crumpled. She realized what she had said. Her anger vanished, replaced by panic. She grabbed Emily's arm. Mom, you're hurting me, the girl whispered. We're leaving, Susan said, her voice frantic, trying to pull the girl back into the dark apartment. We have to pack. No, Arthur said. He stepped forward, planting his foot in the doorway. You're not going anywhere. Not until you tell me what you meant. He looked down at Emily. The girl was staring at him, not just with fear, with curiosity, and with those eyes. David's eyes. Arthur's mind raced. The dates. Susan left 6 months after David died, but the girl was 10. David had been home on leave. He remembered. A fight, the last one, almost 11 years ago. They had argued about the army, about the company. Arthur had said unforgivable things. He looked at Susan, at her thin face, her old clothes. He looked at the girl, 10 years old. Tell me, Arthur commanded. Susan was trapped, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Please, she whispered. Just leave us be. We don't want anything from you. I found this, Arthur said, his voice suddenly quiet. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the small, chipped wooden bird. Emily's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto it. My bird, she gasped. She reached for it, forgetting her fear, stepping out from behind her mother. Arthur's hand was shaking as he held it out. He made this, didn't he? He knew. The moment he said it, he knew. David used to whittle. It was one of the many pointless hobbies Arthur had criticized. Emily took the bird from his large hand. Her small, dirty fingers brushed his skin. My daddy made it for me, she said, her voice a tiny whisper. The hallway tilted. Arthur's breath hitched. He looked at Susan. Her face was a mask of misery. Tears were streaming silently down her cheeks, a quiet admission. My daddy? Arthur repeated. He looked at Emily. Your father? Tell me, Arthur said to Susan. His voice was no longer demanding. It was a hoarse, desperate plea. Tell me the truth. Susan put her hands on her daughter's shoulders, pulling her close. Yes, Susan said, her voice breaking. David was her father. Arthur stumbled back, his hand grabbing the grimy doorframe for support. His legs felt weak. My son. A daughter. This girl. Emily. She's my granddaughter, Arthur whispered. The words felt foreign, impossible. Her name is Emily, Susan said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. She pulled the girl back into the apartment. And she is my daughter. You have no claim on us. Now please, go. She shut the door. Arthur stood in the hallway. He heard the metallic sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. He was alone, in the silence, with the echo of her words. My granddaughter. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. He stared at the peeling paint on the door. He heard the deadbolt slide home. It was a sound of such finality, such rejection, that it felt like a physical blow. Granddaughter. He was a man who processed the world through numbers, through assets and liabilities. This did not compute. He had a granddaughter, his son David had a daughter, and they were living here, in a place he wouldn't even house his dogs. He leaned against the wall. His legs felt unsteady. He was 68 years old, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly weak. He thought of Susan's face, the fear, the exhaustion, and the pure, white-hot hatred she had for him. You barely knew him. Her words were truer than any balance sheet. He had known David the asset, David the heir. He had never known David the man, and David had known. David had seen his father as a man not to be trusted. Not with this. Arthur's fury returned, but it was different now. It was not the sharp anger of a man whose will was denied. It was the hot, sick anger of guilt. He raised his hand to knock again. It was a heavy, slow movement. "Susan," he said. His voice was hoarse. It had lost its power. "Susan, please." "Open the door." There was no sound from inside. The girl, Emily. She can't stay here," Arthur pleaded. "This is not a place for a child. For David's child." He waited. He heard a muffled sound, a whisper, Susan shushing the girl. "Please," Arthur said again. I want to help." "Go away." Susan's voice came from the other side, muffled but fierce. "You can't help. You only destroy." David knew it. He said you'd try to own us. He said you'd turn her into one of your possessions." Arthur recoiled. The idea was monstrous. He told you that?" "He told me everything," she said, her voice breaking. "He told me how you tried to buy his military career, how you tried to break him. He loved us, Mr. Montgomery. He didn't love you, and he didn't want you anywhere near his daughter. Now leave us alone." The silence returned, heavier this time. Arthur stood there for another full minute. He had lost. He who had never lost a negotiation was defeated by a locked door and a woman with nothing. He turned, slowly. He walked down the crumbling stairs. The sounds of the building, the arguing, the crying baby seemed to accuse him. His granddaughter lived here. He stepped out onto the street. The noise and the smell of the city slum hit him again. He saw his car, the gleaming black Rolls-Royce at the end of the block. It looked absurd, like a spaceship landed in a junkyard. Robert saw him and was out of the car in an instant, his face a mask of concern. "Sir, are you hurt?" Arthur just looked at his driver. He couldn't speak. He got into the back seat, his movements stiff. "Home, sir?" Robert asked gently. Arthur stared at the condemned building. "No," he said, pulling out his phone. "Wait." He dialed Marcus. "Marcus," Arthur said, his voice flat. "Sir? Did you find her?" "They are in apartment 3B. The building is a death trap," Arthur said. "I want protection. Now." "Sir, I advised—" "I don't care what you advised," Arthur roared. The sudden shout made Robert jump. "I want a team here." 2 men. Plain clothes. I want them watching that door. I want them watching the building. No one goes in. No one comes out. Do you understand me? "Mr. Montgomery, that's—" "I don't care if it's legal, Marcus." "Do it. And I want you to find a birth certificate for Emily Miller, 10 years old, mother, Susan Miller, father." His voice cracked. He couldn't say the name. "Father, David Montgomery. I need to know. I need proof." "Understood, sir," Marcus said, his voice quiet. "The team will be there in 20 minutes. Arthur hung up. "Take me home, Robert," he said, his voice barely a whisper. As the car pulled away from the curb, Arthur watched the building in the side mirror until it disappeared from view. He was shaking. He hadn't just found a girl. He had found his son's secret and his own greatest failure. Inside the apartment, Susan Miller slid to the floor. Her back was pressed against the door. She wrapped her arms around her knees and began to sob. "Mom." Emily stood in the middle of the small, bare room. She clutched the wooden bird to her chest. The room was cold. They had one mattress on the floor, a small hot plate, and a pile of blankets. Their few belongings were in 2 duffel bags by the wall. "Mom, are you okay?" Emily asked again. "We have to go, baby," Susan whispered, wiping her face. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely see. "But why?" "Who was that man? He looked like the picture." Susan looked up, startled. In Emily's small backpack was a single folded photograph. It was the only one Susan had. A picture of a young man in uniform, smiling. David. "He's David's father, Em," Susan said, her voice rough. "And he's a very bad man." "But he looked sad," Emily said. She was a quiet, observant child. She had seen too much in her 10 years. "He looked like me." Susan flinched. It was true. Emily had David's eyes, but she had his smile too. And Susan realized with a cold dread she had Arthur Montgomery's chin, that stubborn square jaw. "He is sad, baby." "But he's the kind of sad that breaks things," Susan said. She stood up, her movements frantic. "Get your coat. Put your book in your bag." "Where are we going?" Emily asked, her voice small. She was used to this, the sudden moves, the late-night departures. I don't know," Susan said, pulling clothes out of a drawer. "Somewhere he can't find us." "We'll go to the shelter on the west side." "No, he'll look there. We'll get a bus ticket." She stopped, her hands frozen. She had $7 in her wallet. She looked at her daughter. Emily's blonde hair was thin. Her face was pale. She was too small for a 10-year-old. Susan's mind raced back. She had met David in that cold, sterile mansion. She had been taking night classes, trying to become a nurse. He was the first person in that house who had ever asked her name. He'd found her in the library, studying. He didn't laugh. He asked about her books. He listened. Their romance was secret, stolen in late-night conversations in the kitchen and quiet walks in the garden. He was nothing like his father. He was gentle. He was haunted by his service, but he was kind. When he gave her the small wooden bird he had carved, he'd smiled. "It's a dove." "For peace. I need to remember what that looks like." Then he was deployed. She found out she was pregnant. She was terrified. She was going to tell him, but his letters were dark. He was in a bad place. Then the news came. Captain David Montgomery, killed in action. Susan's world ended. She had Emily, alone, in a small hospital across town. She named her. She held her. And she saw David's eyes looking back at her. She had to go back to work. She had a child to feed. She went back to the mansion, a place of ghosts. Arthur Montgomery was a tyrant in his grief. He yelled at staff. He threw things. He was a black hole of misery. She hid her secret. But after 6 months, she couldn't stand it. She looked at this cold, cruel man and knew he could never, ever know about Emily. He would take her, or he would cast her aside. Both were equally terrible. She took her savings and she ran. She had been running ever since. Now, he had found them. "Mom," Emily said, pulling on her coat. "The man's gone." Susan looked at the door. He was. But she knew he wasn't gone for good. Men like Arthur Montgomery didn't give up. They didn't ask. They took. "We can't use the hall," Susan whispered. She went to the window. It overlooked a dark, trash-filled alley. "Get your bag. We're going out the fire escape." The next morning, Arthur sat in his study. He had not slept. The small wooden bird was on his desk next to a stack of papers. Marcus Thorne stood opposite him. He looked tired. "They're gone," Arthur said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "My team was in place at 8:40 p.m. She and the girl must have left almost immediately after you did. They went out the back fire escape. My men were watching the front. It's my fault. I underestimated her." "She's been running for 5 years," Arthur said, his voice dead. "She's not an amateur. She's a mother." He looked down at the papers. "What did you find?" Marcus slid a document across the desk. It was a copy of a birth certificate. Emily Rose Miller. Mother, Susan Miller. Father, David Montgomery. Arthur's breath caught. It was there, in black and white. "She filed for it 6 months after his death," Marcus said. "She had to petition the court. She had proof." "What proof?" "Letters," Marcus said. "And this." He handed Arthur another file. It was a lab report, a DNA paternity test. The test was ordered by Captain Montgomery, Marcus said quietly. He took it at a military base clinic 3 weeks before his death. He knew, sir. He knew he had a daughter. The room spun. Arthur gripped the edge of his desk. He knew. His son had a child, and he had not told his father. He had told a maid. He had trusted her. The betrayal was so deep, so profound, it almost choked him. All his anger at Susan, at the world, dissolved. It turned inward, a heavy, cold stone of guilt in his stomach. He knew, Arthur whispered, and he never said a word. He was coming home, sir, Marcus said, his voice soft. His transfer request was approved. He was scheduled to fly home the week he was killed. He was coming home for them. Arthur closed his eyes. He saw David's face, not as the angry young man he argued with, but as a boy, laughing in the garden. It was a memory so old it almost hurt. "Find them, Marcus," Arthur said. His voice was no longer a command. It was a plea. "Sir, where?" "Everywhere," Arthur said. He looked at the birth certificate. "She's 10 years old. She needs everything. Find them. Find my granddaughter." The search for Susan and Emily Miller consumed Arthur Montgomery's life. He abandoned his company, the board meetings, the acquisitions, the billion EBITDA this, and the projected growth that, it all turned to smoke. He let his lieutenants handle it. He forwarded all calls. His world shrank, first to his study, and then to the contents of a single file. His study became a war room. Robert, his driver, was now his only confidant. Robert would bring him meals on a tray, meals that Arthur rarely touched. "Sir, you must eat," Robert would say, his voice full of a concern that went far beyond his job description. Later, Arthur would grunt, not looking up from the map spread across his desk. Marcus Thorne was running searches. He was tracking Susan's credit, which didn't exist, her social security number, which hadn't been used in 5 years, and her known associates, who hadn't seen her. "She's a ghost, Mr. Montgomery," Marcus reported, his voice weary over the phone. "She's been living on cash. She's had a long time to practice being invisible. She is not a ghost, Marcus." "She is a woman with a 10-year-old child," Arthur snapped. "They need food. They need shelter. They cannot just vanish. Look harder." He was a man starving, and the only food he could imagine was an answer. Days bled into a week. Arthur looked old. His tailored suits hung in the closet. He wore the same pair of gray trousers and a white shirt, now rumpled, the sleeves rolled up. He hadn't shaved. The silver stubble on his jaw made him look less like a captain of industry and more like a man shipwrecked. His anger had cooled, replaced by a cold, aching hollow. It was the same hollow that David's death had carved, but now it had a new, sharper edge. This was a loss he could have prevented. In his frustration, he tore his house apart. Not in a physical rage, but in a desperate archaeological dig. He was looking for his son. He ended up in David's old room. He had not entered this room in 5 years. His staff had strict instructions to keep it clean, but to touch nothing. It was a museum of a person he never knew. Books on military history were piled next to novels by authors Arthur had never heard of. There was a guitar in the corner. David played the guitar. And in the back of the closet there was a single sealed cardboard box. It was marked CPT D. Montgomery, Personal Effects. The military had sent it. Arthur had seen it arrive. He had ordered it put in here, and he had shut the door. He had been too angry at David for dying, too consumed by his own pain to look. His hands, which were shaking, fumbled with the packing tape. He ripped it open. The contents smelled faintly of canvas and desert dust. There were neatly folded uniforms, a pair of worn-out combat boots, a few medals, including a Purple Heart, tossed in as if they were trinkets. At the bottom, there was a thick, leather-bound journal. And underneath that, a stack of letters tied with a simple piece of string. They were addressed to Susan in David's strong, clear handwriting, but they were unmailed. Arthur sank to the floor, his back against the bed. He felt the ache in his knees. He picked up the journal. His son's voice, silent for 5 years, spoke from the first page. It was not about the war. Not really. It was about her. August 14th. Saw S. in the library again. She was studying. She works 16 hours a day and still finds time to read about human anatomy. She wants to be a nurse. She has more drive than anyone I've ever met in my father's boardroom. Arthur flinched. He read on. September 2nd. I told her about the argument with my father. He wants me to quit. He called my men uneducated grunts, and my service a child's rebellion. S just listened. She didn't judge. She just understood. She put her hand on my arm. It's the first time I've felt calm in months. I think I'm in love with her. Arthur closed his eyes. The memory of that argument was vivid. He had been cruel. He had been trying to break David's will, to force him back into the life Arthur had chosen for him. He skipped ahead, his heart pounding. March 21st, 11 years ago. 2 weeks leave. 2 weeks of heaven. I'm dreading going back. S and I. We're not just us anymore. She told me last night. I'm going to be a father. I've never been so terrified in my life. And I've never been so happy. I'm going to have a family. Something real. Something that isn't about money or power or the Montgomery name. I can't tell my father. Not yet. Not ever, maybe. He'll ruin it. He'll try to buy S off, or he'll try to control the child. He'll make it part of the empire. This is mine. This is ours. S is scared. I told her I'd protect her. I'd protect them both. The journal fell from Arthur's hand. He'll ruin it. The words were an epitaph. David hadn't just been a son. He had been a man, in love, about to be a father. And he had looked at Arthur and seen a monster. He had seen a dragon to be kept away from his treasure. He said you'd try to own us. Susan's voice echoed in his memory. He was right, Arthur whispered to the empty room. He was right. He sat there, on the floor of his dead son's room, for a very long time. The self-pity he had nursed for 5 years, the grief that he had worn like a heavy cloak, was burned away. All that was left was the raw, scalding shame. He finally understood. He had not just lost his son. He had driven him away. 200 miles away, the bus wheezed to a stop. "Last stop, ma'am," the driver said. Susan Miller jolted awake. Her neck was stiff. She looked down. Emily was asleep, her head in Susan's lap. Her small, pale face relaxed for the first time in days. She was still clutching the wooden bird. Susan looked out the window. It was 3 a.m. They were at a desolate bus station in a small, forgotten town in rural Illinois. Rain was streaking the dirty glass. Honey, we're here," she whispered, gently shaking her daughter. Emily mumbled, her eyes opening, confused. "Where are we? Are we safe?" Susan's heart broke. "We're safe, baby," she lied. She had $7. She had run to the one person she thought might help. Her half-sister, Clara. A woman she hadn't spoken to in 12 years. They had not parted on good terms, but Clara was the only family she had left. "Come on," Susan said, pulling Emily's small backpack on. "We just have to walk a little way." They stepped off the bus into the cold, driving rain. Susan pulled her thin jacket tighter. She looked at the empty street. She had no phone. She had no money for a cab. She just had an address, memorized, on a piece of paper. 3 miles. You can do this. Hold my hand, Em, she said. Emily's small, cold hand slipped into hers. It's okay, Mom, Emily whispered, as if sensing her mother's despair. My daddy. He was a soldier. He was brave, right? We can be brave. Susan stopped. She knelt there on the wet pavement and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, tears mixed with the rain on her face. Yes, baby, she choked out. He was the bravest man I ever knew. And you are just like him. The phone in Arthur's study rang. Arthur snatched it. What? I found something, Marcus said. His voice was different. It was charged with adrenaline. It's not a bank record. It's not a credit card. It's her sister. Arthur sat up straight. She has a sister? A half-sister, Clara Reeves. They had different fathers, grew up apart. Records show they were estranged, but I ran a check on Clara's address, a small town, Holton, Illinois, 3 hours south of you. What about the address? Arthur said, his mind already racing. The electric bill, Marcus said, and Arthur could almost hear him smile. Clara Reeves has a small house. She's single, works as a waitress. Her utility usage, it's been the same for 2 years, until last night. Last night her water and electric usage both spiked, a small spike, but one that would be consistent with 2 new people in the house. Arthur was on his feet. She's there, Arthur said. It was not a guess, it was a certainty. Mr. Montgomery, sir, what are you going to do? Marcus asked. Do I call the police? Social services? You have the birth certificate? Arthur looked at the journal on his desk. He looked at the unmailed letters. He'll ruin it. He'll try to own us. No, Arthur said, his voice quiet. He looked at his reflection in the dark window. He saw the disheveled, broken old man. This was not a negotiation. This was not a hostile takeover. No, he said again, his voice firming. You will do nothing, Marcus. You will not call anyone. You will send me the address and a check. I need you to cash a check. A check, sir? A large one, Arthur said. And then you're going to find me a lawyer. Not one of my corporate sharks. A family lawyer. The best one in the state. He was going to do this David's way, not his. He was not going to take his granddaughter. He was going to earn her. Robert, Arthur called out, opening his study door. Robert was there in an instant, as if he'd been waiting. Get the car, Robert. We're going for a drive. Home, sir? No, Arthur said. He picked up the small, chipped wooden bird from his desk and slid it into his pocket. It felt like a stone, or a key. We're going to Holton. The drive to Holton was 3 hours of taut silence. Robert drove, his eyes the only thing moving, flicking to the rearview mirror. He was watching his employer, a man he had served for 20 years, disintegrate. Arthur sat in the back, the plush leather a cold comfort. He did not see the flat, harvested cornfields. He did not see the small, forgotten towns they passed through. He was not in the car. He was on a porch, in a slum, hearing a door bolt. He was in his son's room, reading a journal. He held the small, chipped wooden bird in his hand. His thumb rubbed over its smooth head, as if it were a prayer bead. He was rehearsing. What does a man say? I'm sorry. It was too small. I want to help. It sounded like a threat. I am her grandfather. It was a demand, an act of possession. He kept coming back to David's journal, the words of brand on his soul. He'll ruin it. He'll try to own us. I won't, Arthur whispered to the empty car. Not this time. They reached Holton. It was a town that time, and money had passed by. Main Street was a row of brick buildings, some with boarded-up windows. It was quiet. Poor. Robert drove the Rolls-Royce down the street. People on the sidewalk stopped to stare. The car was not just an oddity, it was an accusation. The address is on the next street, sir, Robert said. Pull over here, Arthur commanded. Robert stopped in front of a closed diner. Sir? This car, Arthur said, his voice rough. It's a threat, a fortress. I'm going to walk. Mr. Montgomery, I can't let you. Robert, I am going to walk 2 blocks. I am not going to war. I am going to see my granddaughter. Wait. He got out. He adjusted his rumpled shirt, tried to smooth his trousers. He looked like what he was, a rich man who had been dragged through hell. He walked. The air was cold, smelling of damp leaves. The houses were small, with neat, tiny lawns. He found the address. It was a small white bungalow. It needed paint, but the porch was swept. A lopsided pumpkin sat by the door. Arthur Montgomery walked up the cracked concrete path. He looked at the peeling paint on the door. He felt a wave of nausea so strong he had to grip the railing. This was it. The culmination of his entire life, every deal, every dollar had led him to this. A peeling door in a tiny town. He raised his shaking hand. He knocked. The sound was a gunshot in the silence. He waited. He heard footsteps. A chain lock rattled. The door opened a few inches. A woman's eye, hard and tired, peered out. This was not Susan. We don't want any, she said, her voice rough. I'm not selling anything, Arthur said, his voice a croak. I'm looking for Susan Miller. The woman's face hardened. Who are you? My name is Arthur Montgomery. He saw the recognition. Susan had told her. She ain't here, the woman lied and started to close the door. Please, Arthur said. The word was a reflex. It stopped her. Please, I know she's here. And Emily, I am David's father. I know exactly who you are, the woman spat. You're the reason she's been running. You're the reason her life is ruined. Now get off my porch before I call the cops. Clara. Who is it? It was Susan's voice, thin and terrified from inside. It's no one, Susan. Go back to bed, Clara hissed back. He's here, isn't he? Susan appeared behind her sister, a ghost in the dim hallway. She was twisting a dish towel in her hands. He found us. Susan, Arthur said, desperate to fix this. I am not here to take her. Liar, Susan shrieked, shrinking back. That's all you people do. You lie and you take. Clara, call the police. Tell him to leave. You heard her, Clara said. Get out. Mom? Who's that man? The small voice cut through the anger. Emily stood in the hallway behind them. She was wearing pajamas with little yellow ducks on them, pajamas that were too small. Her blonde hair was messy from sleep. She saw Arthur. Her eyes went wide, but this time she didn't run. She just stared. Arthur's gaze locked on hers. He couldn't breathe. This was his son's child. She was real. He forgot Susan. He forgot Clara. He took one step toward the door. Both women flinched, shielding the girl. Don't you come near her, Susan screamed. I won't, Arthur said, stopping immediately. He held up his hands, as if to show he was unarmed. I'm sorry. He looked at Emily. He tried to smile, but his face felt stiff. Hello, Emily, he said, his voice soft. Do you remember me? Emily just nodded, her eyes fixed on his face. She took one small step forward. Emily, get back, Susan ordered. He looks like my picture, Emily whispered, pointing at him. He is, Susan said, her voice breaking. He's David's father. Arthur's heart ached. He reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the small wooden bird. He pulled it out and held it on his open palm. You left this, he said to Emily. At the cemetery. I brought it back. Emily's face lit up. She looked at her mother. He found my bird. He brought it back. She took another step, reaching for it. Susan grabbed her arm. No, Em. We don't want anything from him. It's mine, Emily said, her lip trembling. It was the first time Arthur had seen her as a child, not a ghost. She was a 10-year-old girl who wanted her toy. My daddy made it. I know, Arthur said, his voice thick. He looked at Susan, over the girl's head. I know he did. I read his journal, Susan. Susan's face went white. You... what? I read his letters. The ones he didn't send, Arthur continued, the confession tearing out of him. He was coming home for you. He was so happy. And he was so scared of me. He looked down at his hands. He was scared I would ruin it. That I would try to own you. He met Susan's gaze, his own eyes swimming. And he was right. I would have. 5 years ago, I would have. I was a terrible father. I was a terrible man. I didn't know him, Susan. You were right. I didn't know my own son. Tears were streaming down his face. He didn't bother to wipe them. He, Arthur Montgomery, was crying on a stranger's porch. Susan stared at him. Her anger was gone, replaced by a stunned, confused silence. Clara's hard expression had softened. I can't change what I did, Arthur continued, his voice cracking. I can't bring him back. God knows I would trade all of it, the buildings, the money, for one more chance. But I can't. He looked at Emily. But I can help you. Not like he thought. Not owning, but helping. He would have wanted his daughter to be safe. He would have wanted her to be warm. He reached into his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick envelope. He didn't offer it to Susan. He placed it gently on the porch railing. That, he said, is a cashier's check. It's not my money. It's David's. From his trust fund. The one he never touched. It's yours, Susan. For you and for her. To give you a start. To give you a life. Away from me if you want. You can take it, and I will never bother you again. I will walk away. I promise. Susan stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. And if I do take it? She asked, her voice shaking. You'll just go? Arthur looked at Emily, at her bright blue, curious eyes, David's eyes, walking away from her. It was the hardest thing he would ever do. He had to mean it. Yes, he said, if that is what you want. I will go. Emily, who had been watching this all, silent, suddenly spoke. Why? She asked. Arthur looked at her. Why what, child? Why are you crying? She asked. And why does your face look like my face? Arthur let out a sound, a short, strangled laugh that was half a sob. He knelt. He put himself on her level. His knees screamed, but he didn't care. He was eye to eye with his granddaughter. Because, he said, his voice a whisper, I lost my son. And for 5 years, I didn't know I had you. And I'm very, very sorry. I'm sorry I scared you. At the cemetery, I'm an old, sad man, Emily. Emily looked at her mother, then back at Arthur. She stepped away from Susan. She walked right up to him. Clara gasped. Susan reached out but stopped. Emily stood a foot away. She looked at his face. Then she looked at the wooden bird in his hand. She put her small, thin hand on his. She didn't take the bird. She just put her hand on his. Her fingers were small and warm. You can give it to me now, she said. Arthur's hand was shaking so badly he could barely open it. He let the bird fall into her small palm. She closed her fingers around it. She smiled, a A small, shy, but brilliant smile. It was David's smile. "Thank you," she said, "for finding him." Arthur Montgomery broke. He put his face in his hands, and he wept. He wept for his son, for the lost years, for the waste, for the cruelty, for the sheer blind luck of this moment. He felt a small hand on his head, patting his silver hair. "It's okay," Emily whispered. "It's okay, Grandpa." Arthur was frozen, kneeling on the cold, damp wood of the porch. His entire, carefully constructed world had been reduced to this, the concrete feeling of his granddaughter's small hand on his head. He heard a sniffle. It wasn't him. He looked up, his eyes blurred, his face wet. Susan was standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. The dish towel was on the floor. Her face was a ruin of confusion, grief, and a fragile, terrifying hope. Clara, the practical one, let out a long, slow breath. She looked at Arthur, then at Emily, then at her sister. "Well, hell," Clara said, her rough voice breaking the spell. "Are you going to let him just kneel there all day? You're scaring the neighbors, and he's getting my porch wet." Susan looked at her sister, then at the man who was her son's father. He looked small. The imposing, terrifying billionaire was gone. All she saw was an old, heartbroken man. Emily, sensing the shift, took her hand from Arthur's head and slipped it into his. His large, trembling hand instinctively closed around hers. "Mom?" Emily said, her voice quiet. "He's cold." Susan's resolve, the wall of anger and fear she had maintained for a decade, finally crumbled. She couldn't fight her daughter's simple, profound compassion. She couldn't fight the truth in Arthur's broken face. She unlatched the screen door. It squeaked loudly. "Come inside," Susan whispered. "Just come in. It's too cold out here." Arthur looked up, his eyes wide. He didn't understand. It was an invitation. "Ma'am, just get in here before you catch your death," Clara grumbled, pulling the door open wide. Arthur used the railing to push himself up. His knees cracked, his body ached, but he didn't let go of Emily's hand. He stepped haltingly over the threshold. He entered the small, clean but sparsely furnished living room. It was warm. It smelled of coffee and cinnamon. It was a home. Emily tugged him toward the lumpy, floral print couch. "You can sit here," she said, as if he were the child. He sat. He looked around. There were photographs on the mantel, a school drawing from Emily taped to the wall. And there, on a small table, was the framed picture of David in his uniform. Susan stood opposite him by the fireplace. Clara guarded the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed. Arthur began. He didn't know what to say. "Thank you." I read the letters too," Susan said, her voice shaking. "The ones he sent me. He was so proud of his men. He was so good." "He was," Arthur whispered. "He loved you," Susan said, the words bursting out of her. "He was so angry with you. But he loved you. He wanted you to see him, not the air. Just him." "I was a fool," Arthur said. He looked at David's picture. "I was a blind, arrogant fool. I wasted so much time, so much love." He looked at Susan. "The envelope, the check. It's still yours. David's. You can take it. You can go to nursing school like he said you wanted to. You can buy a house. You can go anywhere. I will not stop you." Susan looked at the porch, where the envelope lay on the railing. She looked at her daughter, who had climbed up on the couch and was now sitting beside this strange new man. Emily was leaning her head on Arthur's shoulder, her eyes heavy with sleep. I don't want to run anymore, Susan whispered, tears welling up again. I'm so tired. I am so tired of running. You don't have to, Arthur said, his voice thick. He gently put his arm around Emily's small shoulders. Not ever again. 1 month later. The air at Westwood Memorial Gardens was cold and sharp. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Arthur Montgomery stood in front of his son's grave. He was wearing his dark wool overcoat, but he felt warm. A small hand was tucked into his. Is this where you saw me? Emily asked. She was wearing a new, bright pink coat and a white hat that almost covered her blonde hair. This is it, Arthur said, his voice soft. You were sitting right there, crying. I was sad, Emily said, as if explaining a simple fact. I missed my daddy. I miss him too, Arthur said. Is it okay, Mr. Montgomery? Arthur turned. Susan was standing a few feet back, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. She looked different. She had color in her cheeks. Her hair was cut. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. She was wearing a new, warm coat, the same color as the sky. It's Arthur, Susan, he said gently. And yes, it's more than okay. Emily ran to her mother, took the flowers, and walked carefully to the grave. She knelt, just as he had knelt on the porch. She placed the flowers on the grass. Then she took something from her pocket. The small, chipped, white wooden bird. She set it carefully on the granite base, right next to the flowers. Hi, Daddy, she whispered to the stone. I found Grandpa. He's not so bad. He cries a lot. But I think he's okay now. We're okay. She stood up and went back, taking Arthur's hand on one side and Susan's on the other. The three of them stood there for a long moment, a broken, pieced together new family. Arthur looked at his son's name, etched in the stone. The guilt was still there. It would always be there. But it wasn't the heavy, suffocating weight it had been. It was just a part of him now. A part of the man who had lost his son but had, by some miracle he would never understand, found his family. Robert is waiting, Arthur, Susan said quietly. He'll get cold. He can wait, Arthur replied, squeezing Emily's hand. He looked at the sky. He looked at the grave. He looked at the woman and the child beside him. He was a man who had owned everything and had possessed nothing. Now, holding this small, warm hand, he was finally truly rich. He was home. And that's where we'll leave Arthur and his new family. I hope this story is a reminder that even after the deepest loss, new connections can be found in the most unexpected places. It's never too late to heal. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening, maybe with a cup of tea or just settling in for the night. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. If you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We're always trying to improve, so feel free to share your feedback below. Thanks for spending this time with me.